Hi, so let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our MICCAI Student Board webinar series. Today's is going to about making your work stand out, creating effective presentations and posters. First, let me introduce our this year's MICCAI Student Board. I'm Jiahong Ouyang from Stanford University. I'm the professional event officer. I will be the moderator today with Elena. So we'll be holding a series of events during the MICCAI conference. So let me briefly introduce our events. First, we'll have a academia and industry event. So this event will start with a debate panel talking with the top panelists about two topics. The first is about academia versus industry. And the second is the key and the challenge to make successful medical startup. And it will be followed with a networking session that encouraging a small group discussion with our panelists, the sponsor, and other members from the community. Next, we'll also have another webinar talking about burnout and well-being in academia. It's a very important topic, especially during the quarantine time. And the third, we'll also have an entrepreneurship event. From that, we can hear from the founders how what's their early days like, and also what they like to know earlier. And so let's join them and start and see how to start the medical startup. Apart from this event, we also have a series of entertainment events. First, we'll have MICCAI Game Nights. It's the best social time with other young members from the community. And we'll also have a virtual yoga times for everybody to work out and exercise. Apart from that, we also have a sport club, and you can search for MICCAI Sport for the sport club activities. So let's stay tuned to our MICCAI 2021 website. And this is a reminder that during the virtual conference, please don't forget to vote your favorite MICCAI educational challenge. And don't forget to follow us on social media and never miss our updates. So next will be talked by our speaker today. And at the end of the talk, there will be a Q&A session. And please use the chat to write down your questions. So let's welcome today's speaker, Professor Trucco from University of Dudin and Professor Morrison from Michigan State University. So I'll give the charge to you guys.
Okay, thank you very much. I suppose at this point I should go. Is that right? Yeah. Right, nobody's protesting, so I suppose it's my turn. I was about to say good afternoon, but good something, wherever you are. I'm Emanuele Trucco, and the first thing I have to say is thank you very, very much to the committee for inviting me to giving this talk. It's a huge pleasure, and I suspect I must have done something right in the past if you invited me, but so thank you very much. And it's also a topic that it's very dear to my heart. It's an important thing. I have to say, we haven't coordinated with Mike, so I will concentrate on something very essential. I'm aware that I have about 20 minutes only. You all know that this is a huge topic. There's plenty of material online. In fact, too much stuff to choose from. So my choice, I'll show the slide in a moment. The slides in a moment. My choice has been to be essential. And try to concentrate on a recipe. So you can take my talk as a sort of a kit of you know, a repair kit or a Lego kit, something that you can use as a reference. So let's come to the slides. I'll share my screen and we'll take it from there. Okay. Can somebody tell me when you see my slides, please?
We can see them.
Thank you very much. Excellent, fantastic. I was waiting for this magic moment. Okay, let's go straight to the point. This is what I wanted to talk to you about very quickly. This is not a particularly flashy or snazzy presentation. I've kept it to the point. There are two things here. One is this recipe I was talking about that comes from my experience, essentially, and the other, a few extra thoughts that do not have necessarily to do on how to prepare talks, but definitely because you kindly invited me to say something, I think are super important, and I'm very, very happy to share them with you. I've made some assumptions. We are all scientists, so we start with the assumptions and the limit of the study. The assumptions I make is that we're talking about technical talks, like the talks you give at MICCAI or similar conferences. You all know that if you talk to, I don't know, my old grandmother about these things, you have to talk differently. So a lot depends on the audience. I've assumed that you're talking technical. I've assumed that we're talking about talks. We are discussing talks that involve using slides, okay? Because you will find yourself in your life in a situation where you're asked to talk, stop with no slides. It may sound strange, but it does happen. And the third important assumptions I have made is that we are talking to an audience of peers. Now, a peer is, at MICCAI, you know exactly what is a peer. But a peer may be in general somebody who has, you know, a civil engineer or an audience of doctors who have an idea of machine learning and things like that. Okay, a peer in our definition here, in our assumptions, is essentially somebody who, you know, has a certain background which at least overlaps with what is necessary to understand your talk. That is a peer, not necessarily a specialist of machine learning, for instance, okay? And the final thing I want to say is that all this that I'm going to say, that I've started to say, comes purely from my experience. I've taught these things in the past. You've given me 20 minutes, we're very compact, fantastic. As I said, you know, eventually, there's plenty of stuff on the web. You are developing your own presentation styles, of course, so I do not believe in imposing anything, but I think it's more a matter of trying to avoid mistakes. At the beginning, it's very easy to make mistakes. Okay, so this is a recipe. I come from Genoa in northern Italy, homeland of pesto. So this is a recipe. I had to put in some pasta al pesto, of course. There are 5 things to do, not more than those. Each one I'll go through in detail. If you stick to this, you know, you should have avoided most of the common mistake. Message, dimension, draft, rehearse, and feedback. If you manage to do that, sticking to the guidelines, I think you're in business. Okay, I'll take these in orders, and I believe that the protocol is that I'll take all the questions at the end of the answer, so after Mike. The first you have to do is to stay away from the computer. When you prepare a talk, do not open PowerPoint or anything like that. No, okay? The first thing you do is think somewhere with a sheet of paper or whatever electronic medium you want, but not preparing your slides immediately, okay? Decide what your message is. Think of what you want to say. What are the 2, maximum 3 things which are the messages to put across? Is, oh my goodness, I have to give a talk on something I've done in 3 months. I have to tell everything. No, you don't. It would be nice, but you would need 2 months. So you have 20 minutes, okay? So put some effort. It's an investment. Okay, what are the most important things you want to say? In 20 minutes, you'll give some details, but you have to think pyramidally, okay? first the messages. No more than 2 or 3. Don't be tempted. I have 5 important. I have 6 important things to say. No, this is an excellent exercise, right? And this is crucial because this colors the rest of the operation. So number 1. Number 2, equally important, dimension the size of your talk. And you have to do 2 things here. One is dimension the time, and the other is dimension the slides, okay? And there are reasonable rules. In fact, all that I'm telling you today is actually reasonable, I believe. You can get there yourself. It's a matter of experience. I suggest that you think in terms of 2 types of slides. This is obvious. You have primary slides, which are the actual, meat, the contents of what you want to tell the world about. And then there are accessory slides, which must be there, but they will not consume much time. And these are the title, the acknowledgements, these things that are there, but do not take any effort to prepare. Okay. For those, the green things, just put away maximum 3 minutes in your talk, because they will consume some time. Don't be tempted to say, they will not take time. They will take time, okay? So budget for some minutes for that. The primary slides, this is nearly insulting, of course, at the bottom of here, but it's a useful exercise. Don't underestimate these kind of things. You are given a time T, okay, because you're all scientists, and this T supposes 20 minutes, okay? Look at the contents, look at your messages, okay? And start by saying, I think I can do it in 10 slides, right? And this dimensions immediately the time you have for slides, okay? Minus the initial 3 minutes. Then, of course, you have to massage this through as you go along. But start with an idea of how many times. Be reasonable, okay? If you have 20 minutes, don't use 20 slides, because it's impossible. Experience indicates very clearly that 1 minute per slide's average in a scientific talk is not enough, okay? It's better to make a mistake at the beginning in the estimate on the side of too little than too late, okay? Start with fewer slides, perhaps, okay? Then you have to adjust to achieve a reasonable time. Draft your slides, okay? And again, there is a simple recipe here, which I strongly recommend. First of all, these are all characteristics that your slides should have. It's very easy to throw things in because they are interesting. And indeed, everybody does a lot of interesting things. So the temptation, particularly at the beginning, will say this and that and that. No, try to remember these guidelines. Your slide must be focused. Each slide has 1 thing to put across, 1. Okay, and you must be very clear on what this 1 thing per slide is, okay? The material on your slide must be clear. That means, to me, simple. Do not have, look at the figures I put here. Those are with a red cross, okay? These are not good examples, right? Okay, the guy who writes on the blackboard is thinking to himself, clearly, but the blackboard is a good example of how you do not want to present yourself. Keep it lean, right? Use direct language. Do not put prose on your slides. Do not write all the words like you would speak them, okay? Just write, because the slides, at the end of the day, remember that the people listen to you, do not read the slide, they look at the slides, but they want to hear a story, okay? There will be no time of reading all the English or whatever language you're presenting it. I hope that this makes sense. So simple, direct language. I encourage you to exercise extracting key phrases from, the normal way of thinking or speaking. This is an excellent exercise. Try to capture the message they would explain naturally in many words in the compactest, I cannot say that, in the most compact form that you can manage. This is an excellent exercise because it's also a mental exercise, not just for presentation, okay? Because in our field, and I believe in life in general, if I may pontificate for a moment, being synthetic, but being synthetic not because you throw things away at random, being synthetic because you concentrate on the important things is an excellent skill to have, which will help you in your research content as well. I apologize for the background noise. I've been evicted for my flat. I am near a road, so apologies. Your slides, needless to say, must be correct. Okay, and this is obvious, but allow me to remind you that if you put formulae, diagrams, and things like that, don't be tempted. It's easy to be tempted to take something, throw it in, well, because it's late. But it pays to guarantee that everything is correct, because you'll talk to an audience of tens, hundreds, maybe thousands, if you become famous, of people, and there will be guaranteed people who spot every single mistakes in your slide, and it doesn't look good. Okay. The last point, whenever possible, this is not, absolutely necessary. It helps if your slides are catchy. Okay, they have figures, some colors, some interesting background, but please do not be tempted to put catchy before clear. Okay, because the result is normally a mess, right? Catchy comes later once you are happy with your slide. Okay. The next thing is once you're happy with your kit of slides, with your deck of slides, then there are three things I recommend, which are important. Answer these questions. The first one is a question of the audience. Where is this person in the presentation, the speaker? Where is it? Is the beginning? Is it the end? So I think it's helpful personally to include a kind of map at the top. You can see. You can use any sort of unobtrusive small map of where you are. So every single slide, the audience knows where you are. This is very important, okay? The second thing is you want to know, importantly, how much time you have left. And for this, it is useful to have a clock, like the one I put down at the bottom. Now, I'm sure you all are better hackers than me. I'm not particularly good at these things, so you can find better clocks. You can find bars like the things I put on the left, but it doesn't matter. The important thing is it is useful to have a clock because you are located at a certain time. And the third thing is, am I talking too much on the slides? So maybe, not everybody does this, but it may be useful at the beginning to have a slide timer, like the one which was moving at the bottom in my slides down here. Again, there are, catchier things to use. That is a PowerPoint, simple things. But these things are important because, particularly if your talk is important, you want to finish on time. If you don't finish on time, the chairperson begins to make noises, then you have to hurry the final messages, and the conclusions are normally very important because in the conclusions, you don't want to hurry your conclusions. The conclusions are, normally I wrap up everything, I emphasize my key messages. Rehearse is obvious, but not everybody does this because sometimes there is no time. It pays a lot, particularly in the early stages of your career, to rehearse your talk. Sorry, there is a misspelling. I realize now, rehearse without a not correct slide. Rehearse to a friendly audience, your research group, okay? Ideally, you want a mix of specialists and not specialists, because a not specialist, people like my grandmother, will notice things the specialists may miss, okay? And sometimes some side thinking is useful. Again, time yourself in the rehearsal. I think many of you and me had this experience. You think it will take 20 minutes, but it's going to take much more. Invite feedback, invite constructive criticism, okay, particularly in the early stages of your career, right? And decide critically which feedback to implement. And in one rehearsal normally is enough if you've done a good job at the beginning. Okay. So this is everything I want to tell you. I hope I'm not disappointing because it's super, super simple, but simplicity does not imply stupidity or useful, useless, okay? Let me conclude, and I'm basically on time, with a few final thoughts, which are not part of the recipe, okay? Remember that in essence, when you give a talk, you're you're doing an exercise in effective communication. That is what it is. You have some messages to put across, and you want to put them across in the clearest way possible. You want people to understand what you're saying, okay? This seems obvious, but it's important because sometimes we, when we're young, particularly at the beginning of our career, we think more of putting in material than and our preparing the slides and things, then in terms of who is listening to me, what do they know, will they understand or not? Okay, you understand what you write by definition. I hope maybe somebody doesn't, but you should understand what you write. Okay, so you're totally unimportant. What is important is other people. Do they understand? And eventually, as I said, you'll develop your own style. Important point: different audiences. We don't have time to talk about this, but it is rather obvious that you have to tune a talk to different audiences. I keep talking of my grandmother, who died a long time ago, incidentally, but many of you, I'm sure, have been invited already to give talks to public engagement events. Right? If you talk to the general public, you cannot talk, obviously, as you talk to the MICCAI audience, when you have an oral presentation. I hope everybody has oral presentations at MICCAI or in similar conferences. Again, this is a separate chapter that we don't have time to investigate, but please be aware of that. The final thing, and then I'm done, is something which I feel is very dear to my heart. I feel very much this is important. And it has to do with the time we live in. And I do not want to become, to go on delicate ground, but let me say that I feel strongly that it is, that you and I have a mission. We are all scientists, okay? Your mission is getting your PhD. Thank you very much. But as a scientist, you also cannot drop the responsibility that you have to society, okay? And in this moment, a super important responsibility that we all have is to communicate science and the importance of science as clearly as possible. I do not want to go into details, but I hope you all understand what I'm saying. We live in times in which there is, I think, a very concerning spread of mistrust for science. And it is up to you and to me, but to you in particularly, as the next generation of scientists, to make sure that this does not happen too much. I hope you see the link with this presentation. I'll stop here, of course, because at this moment, I think I've talked enough. Thank you very much for listening. This is me after a half marathon a couple of years ago, just because I thought it was nice to show. And questions whenever you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Trucco, for your presentation. I believe we all learned a lot about how to make a good presentation. So for the audience, please write down your question in the chat and we'll go through your question at the end. And next, I'll give the charge to Professor Morrison about how to make a good poster.
Thank you very much. You guys hear me okay? Cool.
Yes.
It's cool. Okay, great. And I'm not Professor Morrison, just Mike Morrison for now. I'm finishing my PhD still, so not even doctor yet, but almost like a month or whatever. Let me share my screen. Thank you guys for coming. Okay. All right. We good? Joanna, Jihong, can you see it okay?
Yes, let's get started.
Okay, cool. So again, I'm Mike Morrison. It's a quick life story. I was a user experience designer and a web developer. I got really burned out with my life and my career and started a PhD in psychology. And then midway through that PhD, I got like a really big health scare. And if anybody's ever been in that position or you have family members that have health issues, which maybe we all do right now, you just sort of want science to speed up and fix you. And I stopped caring about my normal research interests and I just started caring about just making an impact. Like, how do I speed science up? How do I make a difference, right? And it completely changed kind of how I looked at my research and how I communicated it. So I'll start you off with like a work psychology tip since I'm finishing a PhD in work psychology. In work psychology, we have something called goal orientation. And the idea of goal orientation is that people have different motivations whenever they complete a task. And one of them is called approved performance goal orientation. And if you're a grad student or you're a student, or even really a professor, you probably spend a lot of your career being pushed into that state. It's just like you want to be seen to look like you did a good job, right? You want to get an A+ on a test, you want to impress your professor, you want to get the review or the paper approved, whatever, right? That's your goal. The opposite of approved performance goal orientation is something called a mastery orientation, which is you just care about your research. Like Manuel said, like you feel like you have a mission, you want to get your research out for its own sake, and that's your goal. And the more you can kind of shift yourself to believing that what your research is important, because it probably is, you probably have something really important that you're doing. The more you can shift yourself towards believing in that and wanting to get it out, that will do more for you than any design advice I can give you, because most people around you are in that approved performance goal orientation. They're just trying to look like they did a good job. They're not actually trying to communicate that hard. So just shift yourself to actually like seeing what you do is valuable. So you have an idea with a poster and you want to get it out into the world, and that's your whole goal. This is what a traditional scientific poster looks like. We call this like the wall of text or the paper on the poster. The goal here is just to cram as much of your study in as you can and like just fill all the space. This is like pure approved performance goal orientation. Like you look at this, you're like, wow, look at all those figures and text. Like this person put so much effort in, they really thought it through. And that's all they wanted you to think. Like you don't actually get much out of it, right? Like it's not communicating that efficiently. You just get that sense of effort, right? Which is a lot of times when, when I made posters like this, that's kind of what I was going for. I just wanted it to look like, like I'm not stupid, I put a lot of effort in or whatever, right? That's not the same as communicating effectively. The other problem is that posters have looked the same for 30 years or longer. I've had people email me, be like, Mike, I was at poster sessions in the 70s, they were the same. But this should be like a huge red flag to you. Science isn't supposed to stagnate. Nothing in science should be stagnant. If we were really applying the science of communication that we're learning and getting better at every year, posters would change and improve every single year. They wouldn't stay the same. For perspective, they stayed the same since before the internet. And we've learned a ton about how people communicate since before the internet. There's a big problem here because there's a lot of conformity driving all this stagnation. Most people think that, if you can see my mouse okay, that like here's like the span of scientific ideas. You have like, it starts out as opinion, and then like really good science, like, like replicated, it has its theory and form, it's tested, it's replicated, right? And there's another category, there's anti-evidence, right? Which is like, if you do something that we know doesn't work, which there are plenty of, COVID things flying around, like, what is it, the horse tranquilizer or whatever it is now, the dewormer, things like that, like we know doesn't work or whatever, and you're doing that, that's even worse almost than opinion and theory informed, right? Most people assume that the traditional scientific poster is like really well replicated, and that like the designs I'm pushing and all the stuff I'm saying is like opinion, right? It's actually almost the opposite. So the traditional scientific poster design, there isn't a good reason for it. It's actually in the anti-evidence category. If you go and look at studies of past studies of the traditional scientific poster design, they find them almost completely ineffective. People they ignore almost all the content. Their eyes go to big figures and takeaways and things like that. And part of the reason for that is that posters were designed when poster sessions were 6 posters in a room. And for that kind of context, if you get an hour to look at 6 posters, wall of text is fine. But now there are 100 posters in the room, and we never adjusted the design. We've learned so many things in the last 30 years that we haven't applied. The designs that I kind of recommend are here. I can defend every design decision I make with citations and theory. And if you watch my cartoons on YouTube, I do that. I had an opera singer sing the word citation every time I reference a paper. So I can at least defend them with theory, and we're starting to test them out a little bit. But the takeaway here for you is that nobody knows how to create this perfect scientific poster. Like that answer is still out there. Like I don't know, and nobody else knows. And so the takeaway for you should be that like experiment. Like the way we're going to learn what makes a more effective scientific poster is by you really feeling like the sense of courage to try all kinds of things and seeing what works and testing it. So it's still out there, and please experiment. So I'm going to try to get you here. I'm going to teach you in the rest of this webinar the sort of principles and theories that you can kind of launch off from and experiment with your own posters. So I'm going to start out with a demo that will teach you the fundamentals of user experience design better than some pro UX designers in 5 minutes. And then if you can space out after that and you've learned the most important things. So I want everybody to pull out your phones. I'm going to mirror my phone. Hopefully this works. Let's see. I want you to pull up the website you'd use on your phone if you were already bored of me talking and you wanted to distract yourself. So like Instagram, Reddit, Twitter, New York Times if you're fancy, or your local newspaper. And you guys, let's see, Edinburgh. So whatever you want to do to scroll through, just pull it up. I'm going to pull up my real Twitter account. This is always scary. Yelena, can you see my phone screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Cool. All right. I'm going to pull up my real Twitter. It's always scary. I will give a disclaimer that I'm a psychologist. I follow a lot of diverse brains. What I want you to do is just, also if you see stuff on UFOs or RuPaul's Drag Race, that's just me, because I like those things. Anyway, hopefully it's okay. So it'll be better if you do this on your own phone, but you can watch along with mine if you want. What I want you to do is just start scrolling. Just start scrolling and try to distract yourself. You should be pretty familiar with this activity. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of narrate what you're thinking as you're doing it, like a guided meditation. So you'll notice as you're scrolling, that you kind of scroll past some things and you kind of slow down on other things, right? You can think of each post or each tweet or whatever as like a patch, like a bush. You're using the same part of your brain that you used to use to forage for food, to forage for information. If each post is like a patch or a bush, it could contain like knowledge berries, right? And you're kind of like slowing down on some patches and you're switching past others. And there are a couple of factors that determine which things you get interested in. One of them, you might notice that you're trying to listen to my voice. So you're slowing down, you're paying attention to like images, short text, things you can process kind of quickly because my voice is taking up half your cognitive load. So if you had more time, if you were in a waiting room, you might be able to focus on the longer posts and things like that. And that's called interaction cost. You're focusing on very low interaction cost things right now. And if you had more cognitive space, you'd focus on higher interaction cost things maybe. But there's another factor besides how easy it is to process, and that's how interesting it is to you, right? Now this can change. So watch, change your goal. So look for something happy. Keep scrolling, look for something happy. So you're like, okay, here's a Jim Carrey meme in my case, right? I'm scrolling past all the news, right? And just looking for like bright colors, like funny faces, right? Now change your goal. Look for news or something intense, right? Now you're scrolling past all the memes and you're looking for, maybe some science tweets, things like that, right? So it's almost like each patch or each post is giving off like a scent to you, like a cue that it contains something that's relevant to your goal. Like here's a panda, that's good for the happy goal, right? And that cue is called information scent. And so what you're kind of doing is you're kind of doing a trade-off. You'll slow down on things that are more interesting than they are effort. So that are easy to process and interesting relative to where you're at, right? Okay, so put your phones down. Goodbye to those we lost. It's a risky demo. Some of you are probably gonna stay on Reddit for the rest of this, but cool. Just try to remember your foraging theory. All right, are we good for my screen? Do you see information foraging theory? Cool.
Yes.
All right, so what you just learned is called information foraging theory. This is the bedrock of every website you've ever used, every app you've ever used. They all use information foraging theory, whether they know it or not. You now know more about the science of user experience design than a lot of pro UX designers, because we just sort of use it tacitly. So to recap the concepts in information foraging theory, we had first that like it's built on top of that impulse you have to forage for food, right? You're just foraging for like knowledge and information. So we had interaction cost, right? Interaction cost is how easy it is to process, how easy something is to use. Getting fast food, really low interaction cost. Going to the grocery store, following a recipe, buying all the ingredients, that's very high interaction cost. And then we had information scent. Those are those cues that it's interesting to you, that it meets your goal, right? So you can do this with scientific titles, right? If somebody's going through a poster session, what's their goal? Their goal is to learn something, anything. It's so cool. It's one of the only times in science where you walk into a room completely open, right? You just want to learn something cool, right? So if somebody's goal is to learn, the strongest information set you can provide congruent with that goal is to teach them something. So let's do this with scientific titles. So here's a weak scented title. These are all titles for the same article. In a weak sense, we might have investigating the effectiveness of differential mask usage strategies. You're like, okay, this is like a typical scientific title. You're like, I get this abstract. Maybe they studied mask usage, whatever. Okay, I don't even know. If you dial up the information set a little bit to a medium information set, you get a title like this. Worried your cloth mask isn't filtering coronavirus? This hat could make it more effective. Now it sounds like clickbait, sounds like BuzzFeed, right? That's what clickbait is. It's medium information set. It's giving you just a whiff of value without actually giving you value, right? And that's because you got to click. And a lot of times people will do that with their poster titles. You want people to stop and talk to you, so you just like try to clickbait them, right? which is better than too vague, I guess. And I have done everything that's bad, believe me. I started out doing all those things. Plenty of clickbait poster titles. But like the strongest information sent title you could provide for this article would be literally information that people are trying to learn. So the strong information sent would be like this: put a nylon stocking over your cloth mask to make it more effective at filtering out coronavirus. Boom. That literally is like a hit of information. All you had to put in was 5 seconds of attention, and you got a finding out of it. You learned something, right? It's a high rate of return. So you can do this with images too. So here's a weak information sent image. You're like, is it a crowd? Is it about masks? Is it about coronavirus or whatever? You can dial it up a little more, and it's like, okay, this is definitely about masks. The strongest information sent image you can provide is literally a picture of an nylon stocking over cloth mask. And so if you work in a field where you can have actual pictures of your research, those are like the best pictures to use. In psychology, we have to use like abstract images. It's like, how do you represent work meaningfulness in a picture, right? But if you work in one of like a real science, unlike psychology, you can use real pictures from your research and make them really big and generously stacked. So takeaway here on interaction costs and information sent is it's kind of a trade-off, right? That you're going for, again, more interesting than it is effort. And there's a couple ways if you're kind of paying attention that you can achieve that. You can have like a really low interaction cost, something that's really, really easy. And if you've ever clicked like a 30-second YouTube video, because it's like, screw it, it's 30 seconds, who cares? That's really low interaction cost. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's barely interesting to you, you'll click it, right? And the other way you could actually have like a really high interaction cost, but a really strong information set. And have you ever come across one of those articles on the web where it's like speaking to your soul, but it's paywalled and there are pop-ups everywhere? And like in my case, I'll like, I'll register for a fake account or like, view the HTML of the website and like delete the pop-up or whatever, like you're going to get to this damn article, right? Because it's so relevant to you. That's when information sent is overcoming that interaction cost. But the best case is if you have a really low interaction cost and a really strong information set. So if it's all interesting to you and it's easy, you'll just keep engaging. And that's kind of where we want to see poster sessions in the future, is things that are really valuable, provide a lot of value for not a lot of effort, and you can just keep engaging and go through them and go through lots of them without getting fatigued. This is especially important online for those of you doing virtual posters. So the number one finding about how people read online is that they don't. They skim and they scan and they bounce around. They read barely half of all content. And when they do read on screens, you read 20% slower on screens, which means it's more effort to read on screens. You have a built-in higher interaction cost. You've got to make things more skimmable and lighter on virtual posters. Here's another concept. So I don't know if you guys have seen this meme floating around. So you will read this first, and then you'll read this, then this one, and then you'll read this one. Hopefully you guys read that in the right order. This takes advantage of something in graphic design called visual hierarchy. So one of the things I think, if you haven't had a lot of design training, you might not realize is that like a good designer will like take your eyeballs on a tour. They will know what you're going to look at first and second and third and fourth and fifth. And if you're thinking about designing a poster or a slide even, you can sort of take people on a story. You can tell people the story in order, right? And you can control that. And so I'll give you a couple examples of physical posters. So this was my first attempt at just sort of resetting the scientific poster. This was Better Poster version 1. You have a big empty space in the middle that draws your eyes. Main finding, right away, you go right to the main finding. Main finding goes here, translated into plain English, emphasizing important words. And you have a big, generously sized figure, right? Like if you look at eye tracking results, which are about to come out actually of this poster, people just, their eyes just go straight to the main finding, which means like you can orient to the main finding and get it in about 5 seconds just walking by. It's very low effort, right? And the way this is designed, this one, version 1, was designed for physical poster sessions where people are going to walk up to it. You have a sidebar on the left, far away from the presenter, where people can kind of walk up and skim a summary of the study, while the presenter has things they can point to. I've seen this work in person where those things all get used. And then there's a QR code in physical posters that links to the paper, where you can throw all the rest of your details. After hundreds and hundreds of people tried this, I incorporated a bunch of feedback, and the main feedback was I want more figures, like a bigger area for figures, right? So this was another design I came up with. So right away, your eye goes straight to the main finding. When you're in a bad mood at work, it distracts you, which lowers your performance, which is like a plain language translation of the main finding. Research finds that even experts prefer plain language over like more technical speak, and it's faster, it's easier to interpret. Scientists are still skeptical, so you don't have to worry as much about. I know people worry about overclaiming, and as you're trained to write so technically in science, it's almost a risk of the reverse with scientists I've seen so far. But it really does. Writing is a whole skill, writing a punchline. I've actually seen more senior professors are better at writing quick takeaways, I guess, because they know what's important and what's not. But yeah, so you've got a main takeaway, your eyes go straight to it. Really huge figure. People in the data visualization field really love this layout because they can just show off their big figures. And then a quick summary of your study. And the other thing to note about this poster is it uses emotion. So you're usually taught to use your, or not even taught, you usually kind of use your school's background color a lot in posters, right? Your branding colors. But like, what does that say about your science, right? It's like, that's like Michigan State wants me to use green for my posters because that fits their branding goals, but it has nothing to do with the subject of my poster. So this poster is about negative mood, right? So red is, that's the best I could think of for communicating negative mood. It's really hard to communicate emotion, but trying will get you closer than not trying. So rather than using your school's branding color and things like that, try to choose colors and fonts that stimulated emotion relevant to your study. Any science can be made emotional, even if you're studying like a hard science, like material science. Like, what does the material feel like? Is it soft? Is it rigid? You know, is it flexy? Is it brown? It doesn't matter. You try to use something relevant to your study more than just defaulting to a branding color. The other thing to note here is I moved the authors to the bottom. So author names are a big priority, I know, for the authors. But for the attendee who's trying to learn, it's like you're wearing a name tag in a physical poster session, right? It's like the last thing they want to know. They want to like learn everything first. So more like movie credits for authors. Here's another one. Again, your eye goes straight to the main finding, helping people create mental pictures, reduces cognitive load, and boosts comprehension. Here's an illustration of how that works. I have huge graphs. These would be massive in person. And at the top, I've got little punchlines. So it takes a lot of cognitive load to interpret a graph. But if you put a punchline on top, like imagining the text as pictures was better than just reading. It helps people, it helps save that cognitive load for people and helps them get it faster. And that can be really important if you're standing there and like there's all this social pressure. Here's another one that might work better for virtual posters. So this was a challenge I took on to design a poster that had where you can read all of the content of this poster in less than 1 minute. Right away, you're like, okay, mood affects attention at work. Boom, you learn something. Negative affect is distracting, which lowers performance. You learn something. Positive affect promotes focus, which improves job performance. You learn something. So in just 15 seconds, you've learned like 3 things about the study. You can dive into the big, generously sized figures right here. And then for the methods, we have a nice graph summary. This is the original author came up with this. It shows we did a survey of mood over time. It's just sort of an abstract graph. These can be really helpful for understanding. And then a flowchart explaining the methods. Figures are authors and credits at the bottom here because that's not sort of, it doesn't help teach your study. And then in virtual posters, you can actually have a button to read the paper. In PowerPoint, you can create a link and people can just hit a button and read the paper. You don't even need a QR code. And so you can dump all of your details in the paper and maybe your contact details too. You can network that way. So I'm gonna give you one crazy concept before we leave. So this is something I've been working on for virtual posters. So virtual posters really could be really, really different, but we still have to stay in PowerPoint and PDF a lot of times. So here's an example of what you can do with a virtual poster. You can create something called a scroll story, which is like this 6 or 7 slide PowerPoint. You can see I just created these big square slides, right? And you can render this to PDF and people can just sort of scroll through it and learn. So I'm gonna show you what this looks like on a phone. All right, you're almost done. Let me mirror my phone here again. Okay, Elena, can you see my phone?
Yes.
Cool. So a lot of people are going to be browsing the internet on phones. Here's what a traditional scientific poster looks like on a phone. Some of you have had this experience. It's pretty miserable, right? You're like zooming and it's like, oh my God, kill me, right? So this isn't really optimized, this traditional poster for a phone. But if you do a scroll story, check this out. You can just scroll through it. No zooming. Really easy to process. You can spell out the figures. And then you can even link people to like, you know, your YouTube channel or your contact details or read the paper, right? This might feel too short to some of you, but what you do with that extra energy is you go see other posters. You don't want to like fatigue people on one poster. You want them to see lots of them. So this is, I really like this concept. The other thing you can do with the scroll story concept is you can do this. It's a square. It's already shaped for social media. So you can actually save it out as a GIF after you post it as a PDF to your conference, and you can create these things called Twitter posters. So if you go on Twitter and you look under the hashtag Twitter poster, you'll see entire conferences of these, because I did a video on it, of just rotating slides that show off your research. Then the same presentation you can spit out for other platforms. So you could really just save out in PowerPoint the same thing as like a YouTube video with your narration. You could put it on Instagram as like a slideshow and on Twitter. And you can put it on Google Scholar or Skillshare. So one poster, one scroll story could be put on all these platforms where you really maximize the impact of your poster. That's kind of one of the things I'm working on for virtual posters. I've had entire companies try this to much success, and you are allowed to try this. Remember, like, there are no rules right now, really. So please just experiment freely with your posters and kind of report back. So if you want to learn more, I have videos on YouTube. Better Poster Part 1 is the big viral famous one. Probably the funniest one. Better Poster Part 2 is not as funny as Better Poster Part 1, but it's probably more scientific. It has more, it's not just, it has like references and principles and things like that. It's still a cartoon, so it still should be pretty fun. And then I have Twitter posters specifically focusing on those Twitter poster gifts. And that's really sort of the takeaway, is really have fun and experiment. Now's the best time to do it because nobody knows what to do. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Morrison. It's a very vivid presentation, and we learn a lot. So let's get ahead to the Q&A question. And I'll start with the first question from the audience. And for the audience, please feel free to add more questions if you have any. So the first question is, how can we best communicate uncertainties in conclusions? In healthcare, it's very important, but often difficult to get short and snappy titles when you need to include how certain you are on the claim.
So I can take this one, Emanuele, I guess. The best thing I've seen is an so if you can work it in like a but statement. So what you're asking is like, how do you get sort of a limitation in there, right? So you're not overselling, especially in healthcare where there are like legal requirements. There are two things you can do. One, you can try to build it in, like I've seen people do it really elegantly, like, you know, this and this is true, but in these circumstances it breaks, right? The other thing you can have is an anti-punchline. So if you think about having like a limitations punchline in the same way that you have a binding punchline, that can work really well. Like they get the binding and they immediately, the second thing they get in the visual hierarchy is like the anti-punchline. It's like, but don't freak out because this is completely flawed or whatever. You could try that.
Thank you. And
I'm sorry, may I add something?
Sure, absolutely, please.
Thank you, Mike. So I entirely agree with Mike. These are good suggestions. I wasn't entirely clear personally from the questions. In my distorted mind, uncertainty has two meanings. One is, you know, uncertainty in the sense of a characteristic of your results, like modeling uncertainty in a Bayesian network. Perhaps I'm working too much. And but I seem to get a glimpse of another meaning, which was the limitations. This is an excellent word that Mike used, the limitations of your study. And the only thing, so regarding the second, the latter, I would say that my recommendation, follow Mike's recommendation, that was good. My personal recommendation to add is be damn honest. Because for Christ's sake, you know, the limitations are exactly the interesting thing. I am sorry. And, you know, there's clearly, from the point of view of your career, the important thing is got something novel and an oral at MICCAI and papers in TMI and whatever. But from the point of view of science, people are really interested in what are the limits of your method. Be honest, because people, you know, good people will not bog you down because you're honest on limitations. Okay, don't expose the flag too much, but you know, be honest. Don't pretend you've done something you haven't done. Sorry, just that.
I think you've pinpointed exactly what I see in like those senior professors' posters that like. They're just super damn honest. Like that's like that's totally it. That's great.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We can now read the second question, which is for both of you, which is how important it is to include acknowledgement in presentation and posters? Like
references?
Acknowledgement, like, yes.
No, acknowledgements, so like we thank such and such.
Oh, I mean, for posters, again, like think of the learning goals first. Like you want to really communicate. That's so much information to communicate. It's so hard. Get in that first, and then the acknowledgements, sure. But what do you think about presentations, Emanuele?
So my answer would be my answer is very pragmatic. Normally, whatever you publish and the posters you present count towards are beings that you count, and if you are funded by a certain funding body, they want to see a list of the things that you have published, and they will be happy if you acknowledge their funding. So that's the practical thing. If you're paid by body X, I don't know, the association of whatever, you know, in the UK it would be, for instance, UKRI, TSRC, put an acknowledgement to that because they would make them happy, and your supervisor happy as well. And then I normally try to include, and this is also important, I think, from the point of view of team building and good relationship. I also try to include the names of people who I feel have made a contribution but are not authors, very pragmatically.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and here we have another question from the audience. So this is a question for both of you. So how much should you adapt the figures from the paper to the poster or the presentation? And
sorry, adapt what? Adapt what?
How much to adapt figures from the paper to the poster and presentation? Do you need to try or
figures?
Yeah, figures.
Oh, figures. Thank you.
I guess for posters, the thing to remember about posters is people are in a very high cognitive load state. And that means like it's on you to sort of make things lazier to process because they don't have as much resources. So I would, if you can, I mean, sure, make them big is the minimum, right? Give them a takeaway second. But if you really want to put the effort in, make them a lot faster to process. And that'll make you better at figures in general.
Yeah, nothing to add. I think Mike has captured this very well.
The presentation is not that different, right? Like people are just like in the audience, they're trying to process it. You don't know how much time you're going to spend on the slide, right?
Perfect, thank you. So we can go to the other question, which is conferences like MICCAI are typically more about methods than results. So sometimes there is no clear takeaway message. How should we deal with this issue when creating this type of posters?
It's a great question. I'll have a better answer in a year. So ask me, but like, I'll be thinking about that for a while. I think with methods, you still learn something, right? Like, so you're trying to communicate something about your methods. Like you tried something new and it didn't work, you know, or like this has promise, or like you tested an old finding with a new method. Usually there's still some gem in there that's really that you think was the coolest part or whatever, or the most novel part, and try to just emphasize that. You can, I mean, like, figure you have 10, 15 seconds of attention, you can get a few steps in if you use clear images, right? You can get away with images and methods a lot of times more than you can with findings. So you can still get it in, whatever you can do in like 15 seconds and then 30 seconds and then a minute. So you can, if that helps.
Perfect, thank you.
May I say something?
Please.
Sure.
So I think I understand what you know, this person asking the question means, in the sense that so my phrasing of this concept is that, you know, most referees in MICCAI want to see novelty, which is a terribly fuzzy concept, incidentally. But anyway, I see the point. But to say that novelty or content is more important than results, I am sorry, it is something which gets a shiver down my spine. Please, whatever novelty you propose, and if I have misunderstood, my apologies, but whatever novelty you propose, exactly because it is novel, however defined, must be supported by waterproof results. This is why conference like MICCAI and good journals ask for all sorts of tests. Okay, so yes, novelty is important. It is important, okay, but novelty without results solidly, very solidly established is no good.
Oh, completely. Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to sort of an example. Maybe that would help because I'm trying to picture what the question is asking, kind of thing. But I think you can show methods in steps really well, and exactly what Manuel was talking about really like spelling out what you did clearly, right, and how you found it. You can use step layouts that might help for that. where you can clearly show the checks. Again, it's hard to know without a specific content. I didn't mean to suggest that like pure novelty of the methods, but you can like just communicate them quickly, I think, because you only have so much time.
Yeah, I interpreted the question being more, I'm sorry, the thing I don't want to agonize on this, but the thing I picked up on was the importance of, maybe that wasn't the gist of the question, but, you know, the importance of novelty versus results, only that.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, definitely results. The sober ones are always better, because otherwise I think scientists get suspicious if you sound too just novelty focused.
Thank you so much. And the next question is, what should be preferred? Results as detailed numerical data or graphical representation?
For posters, start with the fastest thing and then provide the slow thing. So I would hook them onto like a graphic. Usually figures are faster than the data table, but if you can do the figure first and the data table available, that presentations menu.
I would agree with Mike. If I stand back and try to think a little more generally, the answer to your question is whatever puts the message across more clearly. And I agree with Mike that most of the cases, if we're talking numerical results, if you can build a figure that is, I mean, boom, it tells you immediately, you can see how a curve behaves and so on. Sometimes it is not possible. For instance, because you have too few data points, but you still want to present those. And in that case, you have to think, is it better, you know, to show a table? It's very, you know, catchy. I mean, sorry, synthetic, not catchy, compact. Or is it better to put a catchy sentence? Whatever. And this is where I think for exactly this sort of questions, an excellent question to emphasize the importance of what I was saying in terms of rehearse. Okay. A lot of these questions are perfectly answered, if very pragmatically, okay, by a couple of rehearsals to friendly people, and they will tell you, wow, this is not particularly clear.
Yeah, show me your like for posters especially. I love that. Just like show them for 10 seconds. Like, what did you get, right? Or just like start having them do like a stream of consciousness. Like yell out what you see first and like what it means to you. And you can see people when they get caught up on like a figure or something that's not clear. They'll be like, so this and it's like, nope, that needs to be improved.
Yeah, this is, you know, as I was saying before, one thing that is sometimes we overlook, including myself first, is that we know it all already. So what seems clear to us is not
exactly.
What is good to others, you know? We've done the job. So.
Yeah, it's your study. You know that figure super well or whatever. And like it's not.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And so we have time maybe for the last question, and which was is for Mike, is about do you have any suggestion for posters describing initial stages of a research where you don't have any image available?
So one of the things, I'll go back to what Manuel said about like being damn honest, which is my new favorite slogan. Like people get worried about this. They're like, well, I haven't found anything yet, you know, or I failed or whatever, right? It's like, we all know, you know, like if you like sort of like, we're proposing to do this, we're going to try to do this. Here's like Manuel said, like, here's the methods we're going to try to apply to it, right? And spell that out really clearly. What do you think? People, even if you're really honest, people will give you so much positive feedback. And so I would spell out what you're going to do as clearly as if you know, we're going to the reverse. And then like, I think is the more honest you are, I think the more positive feedback you'll get, not the less or whatever.
Perfect, absolutely perfect. Just as a little compliment, I would comment that if you have decided that you're presenting something, however initial, it's because you and somebody else, you're like a supervisor or whatever, have made a conscious decision that there is enough message. Otherwise, you wouldn't be presenting. And that brings back the whole situation to what we have been discussing. So, okay, and then, yeah, think about the message. How do I present it? Mike's suggestions for posters and so on. The crucial thing here is, do I have enough to present?
That's great.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Jiahong, do you have any further questions before the conclusions?
We don't have more questions here. So thank you so much for Professor Trucco and Professor Morrison for your coming, your amazing presentation, and your amazing insights in Q&A session. So let's give applause to them. Yeah, and I would also like to thanks for our audience for your attendance, and also thanks for the MICCAI Society for your support on our MICCAI Student Board activity. And we hope we can hold more great events in the future for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
inviting us and
Yes.
us for Mike as well. And I hope to see you all in person sometimes.
Yeah.
That'd be great.